History is full of wars, conquests, and revolutions. But hidden beneath all of those are the silent passengers that traveled alongside humanity: diseases. Most people remember the Black Death, that bubonic plague which wiped out nearly half of Europe in the 14th century. Or smallpox, which devastated indigenous peoples in the Americas. But there's another disease, just as infamous, just as destructive. And yet, it rarely gets the spotlight. That disease is syphilis.
About health. Wanna learn without the stress. Welcome to Controversies.
Now, syphilis wasn't just a medical condition. It was a cultural earthquake. It shaped art, influenced religion, toppled reputations, destroyed monarchs, and even changed the course of medicine itself. Imagine this. A mysterious new disease suddenly appears in Europe in the late 1400s. Nobody knows where it came from. Nobody knows how to stop it. And within just a few decades, it's everywhere. Princes and paupers alike suffer its grotesque symptoms. Artists begin painting it. Priests call it a punishment from God. Doctors, desperate for cures, try everything from boiling herbs to rubbing mercury into open wounds. It is terrifying, and yet, strangely, it drives progress. This is the tale of how a tiny spiral-shaped bacterium managed to terrify humanity for centuries. But before we dive too deep, let's set the stage. When we talk about diseases in history, it's easy to think of them as background noise, things that happened in the shadows while the real events played out. But the truth? Diseases were often the main actors. The plague didn't just kill millions, it weakened feudalism and reshaped European society. Malaria shaped wars. Tuberculosis haunted the Romantic poets. And syphilis? Syphilis was like a cruel trickster god, weaving its way into every layer of society, from the beds of kings to the back alleys of brothels. It wasn't picky. It struck the rich and the poor, the genius and the ordinary, the holy and the sinful. And perhaps that's why it fascinated and horrified people so much. Now, here's a question for you. Where did it come from? Was it lurking in Europe all along, hidden and waiting? Did it arrive with Columbus, carried across the ocean like a stowaway? Or was it something even stranger? Well, hold that thought. Because before we can answer that mystery, we need to meet the villain of our story, face to face. But don't picture a monster with claws or fangs. No. This villain is much, much smaller. So small, in fact, that for centuries, no one even knew what it looked like. Doctors could only guess at its existence by the wreckage it left behind in human bodies. It would take microscopes and centuries of science before its twisted little form was finally revealed. A corkscrew-shaped bacterium, wriggling its way through human flesh and blood. This is Treponema pallidum. And it would change the world. It's a bacterium. Its name is Treponema pallidum. A mouthful, I know. But don't worry, we'll get to know it very well. Now, if you were to look at this bacterium under a microscope, you wouldn't see around it, like E. coli. You wouldn't see a rod shape, like tuberculosis. No, this little demon looks like a tiny corkscrew, a delicate, spiral ribbon, twisting and wriggling its way through human tissue. Scientists call this shape a spirochete. And spirochetes are masters of stealth. They can burrow through skin. They can slip into the bloodstream. They can hide in organs, in bones, even in the brain. And once they're in, they can stay for years. But here's the thing, syphilis wasn't the only disease caused by these twisted little microbes. You see, Treponema has cousins. In tropical regions, you'll find yaws, a disease that causes terrible sores on the skin and bones. In some deserts, there's vigel, which disfigures the face and mouth. And in South America, there's pinta, which changes the color of people's skin. At first glance, they all seem like different diseases. But here's the kicker. When scientists finally put them under the microscope, they looked identical. Imagine that 4 diseases scattered across the world, all caused by the same family of bacteria. It's like having a criminal gang that wears the same mask wherever they strike. So for centuries, doctors argued. Was syphilis really something new? Or was it just one of these ancient diseases, changed and adapted to new environments? We'll get back to that debate soon. But let's return to syphilis itself. This bacterium is a master of disguise. You see, our immune system, that army of white blood cells, antibodies, and defenses, normally learns how to fight an invader after the first encounter. That's how vaccines work. That's why once you get chickenpox, you usually don't get it again. But Treponema pallidum? It's like a shapeshifter. It can change the proteins on its surface, confusing the immune system. It slips past defenses like a spy in a stolen uniform. 1 week, your body thinks it knows how to fight it. The next week, it's changed its disguise. This is why syphilis doesn't just strike once and leave. It moves in stages, sneaky, terrifying stages. At first, it appears as a single painless sore, called a chancre. Nothing too dramatic. But then, just when you think it's gone, bam! It comes back, spreading rashes across the body, sometimes even on the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. And if that weren't enough, syphilis has a cruel talent. It can go quiet. Years, sometimes decades, of silence. The victim might think they're cured. But deep inside, the spirochetes are waiting. Slowly, quietly, doing damage. And when syphilis comes back in its final stage, tertiary syphilis, it's a horror show. Open ulcers. Collapsed noses. Dementia. Blindness. Insanity. And finally, death. Now, imagine all of this, but in the 1500s. No microscopes, no antibiotics. No understanding of bacteria at all. To doctors of the Renaissance, syphilis seemed like a curse straight out of hell. A person could look fine 1 year, and then, slowly, their face would collapse, their mind would unravel, and their body would rot away. And the worst part? It spread through sex. This made it not just a disease, but a scandal. A mark of sin, of shame, of moral failure. It was, in every sense, the perfect recipe for fear. And so, syphilis spread like wildfire through Europe. But here's the question that haunted doctors, priests, and ordinary people alike. Where did it come from? Was it a punishment from God? A new plague born out of human sin? Or, did it hitch a ride across the ocean with explorers like Christopher Columbus? That mystery, the origins of syphilis, sparked centuries of debate. And to this day, scientists are still arguing about it. But before we uncover the answer, we need to take a step back into the Renaissance world. A world of suspicion, finger-pointing, and blame. Because if there's one thing people are really good at, it's blaming their neighbors for their misfortunes. And so, our story continues, with the great blame game of syphilis. When this mysterious new disease started sweeping across Europe in the late 1400s, people panicked. It spread quickly. It disfigured. It killed. And since nobody really understood germs back then, the only logical conclusion was, someone must have brought this curse upon us. So the blame game began. Let's start in Italy. When syphilis first appeared, the Italians looked around, saw French soldiers running wild through their cities, and said, "Ah! This is clearly the French disease." That's right, syphilis became known in Italy as morbo gallico, the French disease. But the French? They weren't about to take that kind of slander lying down. They fired back, calling it the Neapolitan disease, blaming Naples, in southern Italy. The Germans and the English? They sided with the Italians. To them, syphilis was most definitely the French disease. The Russians? They looked west and went, nope, this is obviously the Polish disease. The Polish? They said, excuse me? Us? No, this is the German disease. Meanwhile, the Danes, the Portuguese, and even the folks of North Africa all agreed to point their fingers at Spain. To them, syphilis was the Spanish disease. And the Turks? They raised the stakes, blaming not just one country, but an entire religion. For them, it was the Christian disease. So basically, syphilis was like a giant hot potato of blame. Every country passed it to the next, desperately trying not to be the one stuck holding it. And honestly, can you blame them? Nobody wanted to admit that this terrifying, body-wrecking, mind-melting disease was coming from their own people. But it wasn't just Europe pointing fingers. In India, Muslims blamed Hindus. Hindus blamed Muslims. And in the end, everyone just threw up their hands and said, "You know what? Let's just blame the Europeans." Which, to be fair, might have been the closest to the truth. Now, it's important to remember, syphilis wasn't just a health issue. It was a moral scandal. Because it spread through sex, it carried a heavy dose of shame and judgment. This wasn't like catching the flu. No, not if you had syphilis, people assumed you'd been living a sinful, immoral life. Which meant, nations didn't just blame other nations for spreading a disease. They blamed them for spreading sin itself. One French physician in the 1500s, Jean Fernel, even gave syphilis a fancy Latin name, luis venera, or the venereal pest. Basically, the plague you get from Venus, the goddess of love. And then came Girolamo Fracastoro, a poet doctor from Verona. In 1530, he wrote an epic poem called Syphilis Sib Morbus Gallicus. And yes, that's where we got the name syphilis. In his story, Syphilis is a shepherd who insults the god Apollo. And as punishment, Apollo curses him and his people with a hideous new disease. So if you've ever wondered why the disease has such a strange, almost personal name, it's literally because of a fictional shepherd in a Renaissance poem. Imagine if COVID had been named after a character in a Marvel comic. That's the level of weird we're talking about. But let's zoom out for a second. Where did syphilis actually come from? Because as much as people wanted to blame the French, or the Spanish, or even entire religions, the truth had to be deeper than that. And for centuries, historians, doctors, and scientists have wrestled with this question. Three big theories have dominated the debate. 1. The pre-Columbian hypothesis, the idea that syphilis existed in the Old World long before Columbus, just hiding in plain sight. 2. The Unitarian hypothesis, which says all the treponemal diseases, like yaws and pinta, are actually different faces of the same infection, adapting to environment and culture. 3. And the most famous, the Columbian hypothesis, the idea that Columbus's sailors carried syphilis back from the New World in 1493, and from there it exploded across Europe. So let's break these down. The pre-Columbian hypothesis suggests that syphilis, or at least its close relatives, had been with humanity for tens of thousands of years. Here's how it goes. Around 15,000 BC, a skin disease called pinta may have emerged in Africa or Asia. It wasn't sexually transmitted, it spread by touch. Then, around 10,000 BC, mutations of pinta gave rise to yaws, another treponemal disease that still affects children in tropical regions today. Around 7000 BC, as the climate changed and deserts formed, endemic syphilis appeared in arid zones. This one spread in dry climates where hygiene was limited. Finally, around 3000 BC, in cooler parts of southwestern Asia, the Treponema bacterium adapted again, this time becoming venereal syphilis, transmitted through sexual contact. According to this theory, syphilis had been circulating in Europe, Asia, and Africa all along. It wasn't new, people just didn't recognize it. Many cases may have been mistaken for leprosy, which also caused skin lesions and disfigurement. Remember, medical knowledge was pretty crude before the modern era. So, to the advocates of this theory, syphilis wasn't an invader from across the Atlantic. It was a local, just waiting for the right social and environmental conditions to explode. Sounds convincing, right? But there's a problem. When researchers went back and studied old skeletons from Europe, they struggled to find clear, undeniable evidence of syphilis lesions before Columbus's voyages. And the lesions they did find often turned out to be something else entirely, or dated to later than they thought. So while the pre-Columbian theory is fascinating, the evidence supporting it is shaky. Next, we have the Unitarian hypothesis. Think of it like this. Instead of treating pinta, yaws, endemic syphilis, and venereal syphilis as separate diseases, what if they're all just different masks of the same bacterium? Same family. Same DNA, but adapted to local climates, cultures, and lifestyles. So in warm, humid Africa, Treponema became in dry Middle Eastern climates, it became endemic syphilis, and in Europe, with its more civilized societies and stricter hygiene, it transformed into venereal syphilis. According to this theory, Treponema didn't suddenly appear or travel across oceans, it was everywhere all along, just changing costume like an actor depending on the stage. Supporters of this idea also point out that yaws was already present in Africa before Columbus's voyage. And with the transatlantic slave trade kicking off around that time, Treponema could have spread in multiple directions, mixing and mutating along the way. The Unitarian theory is clever. It explains the similarities between the treponemal diseases. But it has the same problem as the pre-Columbian one, a lack of solid archaeological evidence in Europe before 1492. While it makes sense biologically, it doesn't quite solve the historical mystery. And now, the most famous, most widely accepted theory, the Columbian hypothesis. This one says syphilis was brought to Europe by Columbus's sailors after his first voyage to the Americas in 1492. Here's what we know. In 1493, Columbus returned to Spain from Hispaniola, today's Haiti and Dominican Republic, bringing with him not just gold and exotic goods, but also crew members, many of whom were sick. Spanish physicians like Ruy Díaz de Isla documented a new and unknown disease spreading in Barcelona shortly after Columbus's return. By 1495, during Charles VIII's invasion of Naples, Italian doctors described a horrific new illness ravaging French soldiers. Pustules, ulcers, pain so intense that some said it was worse than leprosy. This timing is suspiciously perfect, and unlike the Old World skeletons, archaeologists have found clear skeletal evidence of syphilis in pre-Columbian America thousands of years before Columbus. So, if the disease was already well established in the New World, and only appeared suddenly in Europe after 1492, well, you can see why most historians and scientists lean toward the Columbian hypothesis. But wait, there's a twist. Some researchers in the 20th century pointed to European skeletons they thought showed signs of syphilis before Columbus. Could this disprove the Columbian theory? Well, maybe not, because when modern scientists retested those bones with radiocarbon dating, they discovered a big problem. Turns out, many of those skeletons came from coastal regions where seafood was a big part of the diet, and seafood contains old carbon from the ocean, which messes up the dating process. After correcting for this, most of those supposedly pre-Columbian skeletons were actually from after 1492. Mystery solved. But here's the beautiful thing about science, it's never truly settled. Even today, new research pops up, sometimes questioning the Columbian hypothesis, sometimes reinforcing it. The truth may be more complex than a simple Old World versus New World debate. It may be that Treponema existed in multiple forms across the globe, and Columbus's voyage just acted like a spark, igniting a worldwide epidemic. Whichever version you believe, one thing is certain: by the end of the 15th century, syphilis was here to stay, and it was about to leave its mark on European history in ways no one could have imagined. Picture this, it's the year 1494. Europe is a tinderbox of rival kingdoms, alliances, and grudges. And right in the middle of it all, King Charles VIII of France decides he wants to seize the kingdom of Naples in southern Italy. So, he does what ambitious kings do. He gathers one of the largest armies Europe has ever seen, tens of thousands of soldiers, mercenaries, camp followers, prostitutes, and opportunists, and marches them across Italy. This is not just a military campaign, it's a traveling circus of chaos. Now, Charles's army storms into Naples, but shortly after, something strange begins to happen. The soldiers start getting sick. At first, it looks like small sores. No big deal, they think, but then, the sores grow, they ulcerate, they spread across the body. Hair falls out and flesh rots, faces are disfigured, and the pain? Unimaginable. One Italian physician described it as if the body was being eaten alive from within. People said it was worse than leprosy, worse than plague. By the time Charles's soldiers retreat from Naples, they're carrying more than just weapons. They're carrying syphilis, and here's the kicker, those soldiers weren't just French. Charles's army was a patchwork of mercenaries from across Europe: Germans, Spaniards, Swiss, Italians. When the army scattered, they carried the disease back to their homelands. And suddenly, syphilis was everywhere. From Naples, it spread to France. From France, to Switzerland and Germany. From Germany, to Poland, Russia, and Hungary. By 1497, just 3 years later, syphilis had reached the British Isles. And from there, it sailed with explorers and merchants to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. In less than a decade, syphilis went from a mysterious outbreak in Naples to a pandemic spanning 3 continents. Now, I need you to understand something important here. The syphilis we know today is bad, but the syphilis of the late 1400s? It was monstrous. Modern syphilis moves slowly, taking years to progress. But early accounts described the disease as far more aggressive, fast, and deadly. One chronicler said, "It attacked the face, so that the nose and the lips fell off, and it ate the flesh of the body, and gave off a horrible odor." Others wrote of pustules the size of acorns, spreading across the skin, bursting, and leaving behind deep, stinking ulcers. The victims often died within just a few months. Imagine the terror of seeing your friends, your comrades, your lovers, disintegrating before your eyes. And because it spread through sex, the shame was unbearable. This wasn't just death. It was a moral judgment. The church quickly declared it a punishment for sin, especially lust and promiscuity. Suddenly, syphilis wasn't just a disease. It was a symbol of divine wrath. The role of war in spreading syphilis cannot be overstated. Think about it, armies were perfect incubators. Tens of thousands of men living in close quarters. Prostitution thriving around every military camp. Soldiers moving rapidly from city to city, kingdom to kingdom. Add in the mercenaries who, once their contracts ended, returned to their homes carrying the infection, and you've got the perfect recipe for a pandemic. It wasn't just Naples. The Italian wars, which raged for decades, kept fueling the fire. Wherever armies marched, syphilis followed. Now imagine being a regular citizen in 1500.1 year, you'd never even heard of this disease. The next, it's everywhere, spreading through brothels, taverns, even the nobility's courts. No one was safe. Rich merchants caught it. Kings caught it. Priests caught it. Even popes caught it. It was terrifying, but also, it was scandalous. Whispers spread through cities. Did you hear? That wealthy banker has the French disease. That duke? He's hiding sores under his robes. In some places, people with syphilis were publicly shamed, forced to wear special clothing so everyone knew their sin. It wasn't just a medical crisis.
He should be kept away.
It was a social earthquake. So what did people do to treat this horror? Well, brace yourself. One of the most common treatments was mercury. Yes, mercury. The toxic metal. Doctors would smear mercury ointments on the skin, or fumigate patients in mercury vapors. The idea was, a powerful poison can drive out the lesser poison. Patients would drool uncontrollably, lose teeth, suffer organ damage, and often die of mercury poisoning before syphilis killed them. The saying went, "A night in the arms of Venus leads to a lifetime on Mercury." And that wasn't even the worst. Other treatments included bloodletting, bizarre herbal concoctions, or, get this, deliberately giving patients malaria, because the fever sometimes slowed down syphilis. Medicine in the 1500s was not for the faint of heart. But here's something fascinating, syphilis didn't just ravage bodies. It reshaped culture. Artists painted its victims. Poets wrote about its shame. Moralists preached fiery sermons about lust and punishment. Even fashion changed. Because syphilis often caused hair loss, wigs became popular among the wealthy. Later, in the 17th and 18th centuries, powdered wigs weren't just a style, they were a cover-up for disease. And in portraits of kings, popes, and nobles, you can sometimes spot subtle clues: a hat tilted just so, a scarf draped across the face, maybe hiding more than just fashion. By the 1500s, syphilis had stopped being just a soldier's disease. It had climbed into the velvet-draped chambers of kings, the marble halls of popes, and the gilded studios of artists. It didn't matter if you were a peasant in a tavern or a monarch on a throne. Syphilis was the great equalizer. And Europe's most powerful people were not spared. Let's start with royalty. One of the earliest and most infamous royal cases was King Henry VIII of England. Now, historians still argue whether Henry actually had syphilis. Some say the evidence is weak. But the rumors? They were everywhere. Think about it. He had multiple wives. He was notorious for mistresses. He suffered from mysterious health problems later in life. Ulcers, leg sores, mood swings, paranoia, all of which some people linked to syphilis. Whether he truly had it or not, the association was strong enough that Henry became a symbol of the disease's reach into the highest levels of society. And he wasn't alone. King Francis I of France was said to have contracted syphilis, possibly during his many love affairs. Ivan the Terrible of Russia? Rumored to have suffered from it as well. Even the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I had whispers swirling around him. For nobles, syphilis wasn't just an illness. It was a political liability. Imagine rival courts whispering, "The king's nose is collapsing. That duke can't produce heirs." In an age where royal image was everything, syphilis was both a health disaster and a public relations nightmare. Now let's talk about the church. For centuries, the Catholic Church preached morality and purity. But behind closed doors? Popes, cardinals, and priests were just as human as anyone else. And syphilis exposed their secrets. Take Pope Alexander VI, one of the most infamous popes in history. He openly kept mistresses, fathered children, and was accused by his enemies of spreading disease. His son, Cesare Borgia, the ruthless Italian noble who inspired Machiavelli's The Prince, was almost certainly infected with syphilis. His skin was said to be covered in sores. And Cesare wasn't unique. Doctors in Rome in the early 1500s wrote that syphilis was rampant among the clergy. Some priests even saw it as divine punishment for hypocrisy. Imagine the scandal. The very men preaching against lust, marked by the sores of lust itself. Now, let's step into the studios of the Renaissance artists. Art in this period was obsessed with the human-bodied beauty, perfection, the divine form. But syphilis, it twisted those ideals. One of the most famous painters linked to syphilis was Albrecht Dürer, the German master. In his engravings, scholars have spotted subtle signs of obsession with disease, disfigurement, and decay, possibly reflecting his own fears or experiences with syphilis. Titian, the Venetian painter, depicted figures with strange, reddish rashes, details some art historians think were inspired by real cases he saw. And then there was Benvenuto Cellini, the great Italian sculptor and goldsmith. He openly admitted in his memoirs to contracting syphilis, describing the treatments he endured and the suffering he went through. Artists didn't just paint saints and gods. They painted the human condition. And in the 1500s, that condition included syphilis. Here's something fascinating. If you look closely at portraits from the Renaissance and Baroque periods, you sometimes see subtle signs of syphilis. A nose slightly flattened. A lip scarred. A hand hidden in shadow. Of course, artists rarely admitted it outright, especially if their subject was a noble or a pope. By the late 15th century, Europe was bursting at the seams. Nations like Spain, Portugal, England, and France were hungry for land, gold, spices, and power. This was the age of discovery. But it could just as easily be called the age of disease. Because as ships carried explorers, conquistadors, and merchants across the seas, they also carried something far more sinister. Syphilis. You've probably heard of the Columbian Exchange, the great swapping of crops, animals, and ideas between the Old World and the New. Europe brought wheat, cattle, and horses to the Americas. The Americas gave back corn, potatoes, and tomatoes. But they also gave back something darker. If the Columbian hypothesis is correct, syphilis traveled with Columbus's crew in 1493, and from there, it hitched a ride to every corner of the globe. As European ships began raiding and trading along the African coast, syphilis followed. But here's the twist: treponemal diseases already existed in Africa. Remember yaws? That tropical cousin of syphilis? It was already widespread. But when Europeans arrived, they didn't just bring chains and guns. They brought new strains of treponemal infections. And as Africans were enslaved and transported across the Atlantic, the bacteria spread in every direction. syphilis became a hidden passenger on the Middle Passage, the brutal voyage that carried millions of enslaved Africans to the Americas. And the suffering didn't stop at the plantations. It ricocheted back to Europe, carried by sailors, traders, and colonists. Now, picture this, it's the early 1500s, and Portuguese sailors have just arrived on the coast of India. They set up trading posts, they intermarry, they visit brothels. And soon, local physicians are describing a new, frightening disease. In India, it gained nicknames like the Portuguese disease. Because of course, as always, everyone blamed the foreigners. And from India, it spread further east, along the great trade routes into Southeast Asia, and eventually into China and Japan. In China, the Ming Dynasty records describe a plague of sores spreading in the late 1400s and early 1500s. It was seen as a punishment from the heavens, and Chinese doctors linked it to sexual excess, echoing European views. But here's something interesting. In Chinese medicine, the treatment often involved mercury, just like in Europe. Different continents, different philosophies, but the same desperate, toxic solution. By the 1600s, syphilis was everywhere. But by the 1800s, medicine was changing.
I think we found it.
The germ theory of disease, the radical idea that tiny microbes caused illness, was starting to take hold. The question was, could syphilis, too, be the work of a hidden microbe? The breakthrough came in 1905. Two German scientists, Fritz Schaden and Erich Hoffmann, peered through their microscopes at samples taken from syphilis sores. And there it was, a tiny, corkscrew-shaped bacterium, wriggling like a serpent. They named it Treponema pallidum. For the first time in history, humanity could point to the exact cause of syphilis. It wasn't sin. It wasn't bad air. It was a bacterium. That little spiral, the spirochete, had been driving empires, scandals, art, and tragedy for 400 years. But discovery was only the beginning. How could doctors know who had syphilis, especially in its hidden stages? Enter August von Wassermann, another German physician. In 1906, just 1 year after Schaden's discovery, Wassermann developed the first blood test for syphilis. It became known as the Wassermann test. For the first time, doctors could detect syphilis even when no sores were visible. It was revolutionary. Hospitals, armies, and governments began using it widely. Suddenly, the invisible disease had a spotlight shining on it. Now came the hardest part, treatment. Mercury had been the go-to cure for centuries. But it was slow, toxic, and often killed patients before the disease did. In the early 1900s, a new hero entered the stage, Paul Ehrlich. Ehrlich was obsessed with the idea of a magic bullet, a chemical that could kill microbes without harming the patient. After testing hundreds of compounds, in 1909 his team discovered one that worked against syphilis. It was called arsphenamine, better known as salvarsan. Yes, it was based on arsenic. Still toxic, still risky. But compared to mercury, it was a miracle. For the first time, doctors had a treatment that really worked, at least, for a while. But salvarsan was far from a cure-all. It was expensive. It required careful injections. And it didn't always wipe out the disease completely. Scientists kept searching. Then, in 1928, a Scottish scientist named Alexander Fleming noticed something strange in his laboratory. A mold called penicillium was killing bacteria in his petri dishes. At first, nobody cared. The discovery sat on the shelf for a decade. But when World War II broke out, researchers finally unlocked its potential. Penicillin became the world's first true antibiotic. And in the 1940s, doctors discovered something extraordinary: penicillin didn't just treat syphilis. It cured it. A single injection could clear the disease that had tormented humanity for centuries. Think about that for a moment. The year was 1932. America was in the midst of the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce. Poverty was widespread, especially in the rural South. And in Tuskegee, Alabama, a group of poor black sharecroppers were about to be drawn into an experiment they did not understand. The U.S. Public Health Service, the federal government's health branch, launched what they called the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. Sounds clinical. But behind that title hid an experiment that would last 40 years and leave a stain on medical ethics forever. The study recruited about 600 black men from Macon County. Roughly 400 had syphilis. The others did not and served as a control group. The men were mostly poor, uneducated farmers. Many couldn't read or write. They were simply told they were being treated for bad blood. Now, bad blood was a catch-all phrase in the South at the time. It could mean anemia, fatigue, or just general sickness. To these men, bad blood didn't sound like a deadly disease. And here's the heartbreaking part: they trusted the government doctors. The men were promised free medical care. They got free meals, transportation, and even burial insurance. To men living in poverty, that sounded like a blessing. But there was a dark catch. The doctors never told them the truth, that they had syphilis. That they were not actually being cured. Instead, the men were being studied, to watch how the disease destroyed the body if left untreated. At first, the study was meant to last just a few months. But as time went on, the Public Health Service decided to keep it going. And going. And going. It would last 40 years. Even when penicillin became the standard, life-saving cure in the 1940s, the doctors running Tuskegee deliberately withheld it from the men. Think about that. While soldiers, politicians, and ordinary citizens across America were cured with a simple shot, these men in Alabama were denied treatment, all in the name of science. The men underwent painful tests. Spinal taps. Blood draws. Regular exams. But when it came to real treatment, they were given placebos like aspirin or ineffective remedies. The doctors tracked the men as the disease progressed. As sores spread. As blindness set in. As bones warped. As hearts and brains were destroyed by the infection. Even when the men went blind, became paralyzed, or died, the study continued. The researchers were not curing. They were watching. Over the 40 years of the Tuskegee study, dozens of men died directly from syphilis. Many of their wives were infected. And tragically, children were born with congenital syphilis passed from mother to child. Entire families were shattered. Generations scarred. The study might have continued even longer, if not for one man. In the early 1970s, a whistleblower named Peter Buxton, a young employee of the Public Health Service, leaked information about the study to the press. In 1972, the story hit the headlines. The public was outraged. How could this happen in America? How could doctors let this go on for 40 years? Under immense pressure, the government finally shut the study down. In 1973, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the men and their families. Eventually, the government paid a settlement of about $10 million. But money couldn't undo the damage. The legacy of Tuskegee was not just about those 600 men. It was about the trust between communities and medicine. For many African Americans, Tuskegee became a symbol proof that the government and doctors could not be trusted. And that mistrust lingers even today, affecting vaccination rates, participation in research, and confidence in healthcare. It wasn't until 1997, 65 years after the study began, that the U.S. government formally apologized. In a solemn White House ceremony, President Bill Clinton addressed the surviving participants and their families. He said, "The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. To our African American citizens, I am sorry." It was a moment of recognition. But for many, the apology came far too late. The Tuskegee study forced the medical world to confront its darkest impulses. It led to the creation of new safeguards. Informed consent became a cornerstone of medical ethics. Institutional review boards, IRBs, were established to oversee research. Strict rules were put in place to protect human subjects in experiments. In other words, Tuskegee changed how science is done. But it came at an unbearable cost. But now, it's time to ask, where is syphilis today? According to the World Health Organization, There are an estimated 7 million new cases of syphilis every year worldwide. That's millions of people every year still facing this centuries-old disease. And here's something especially concerning. Cases of congenital syphilis, when a mother passes the infection to her baby during pregnancy, are also rising. This can lead to stillbirths, infant deaths, or lifelong disabilities. The good news? Syphilis is still very treatable. A single shot of penicillin remains the gold standard. It works just as well today as it did in the 1940s. Across the globe, health organizations are working hard to fight back. Posters, billboards, social media campaigns all urging people to get tested, get treated, and talk openly about STIs. So, what does the future look like? Some scientists are exploring the possibility of a syphilis vaccine. It's tricky. Treponema pallidum is a stealthy bacterium, but research is ongoing. The history of syphilis is, in many ways, the history of humanity. Messy, painful, filled with mistakes, but also with progress, hope, and survival. And remember, we're still writing the ending. Because the fight against syphilis is not over. But the power to change its future is in our hands.
Come take a peek. It's smart, it's fun, it's cartoon clinic.